Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm returning to the theme of risk. In a recent discussion, I spoke to Michelle Wooker, author of You Are What You Risk, which explored how each of us has a risk fingerprint. In simple terms, an approach to how we think about risk. There's a link to that episode in the show notes. This time, I'm going to look at risk from an organisational perspective. How can companies be better at managing the risk they face in an uncertain world? My guest, Hans Læssøe, spent over 35 years working for a company you will all have heard of, and which I'm fairly certain will at some stage of your life have brought you joy. In my case, it still does. That company is Lego, and as you'll hear, Hans held a variety of roles within the company, culminating in being responsible for developing and running Lego's strategic risk management program. In other words, helping Lego's senior management to better understand and mitigate the risks they face on a strategic level. The things that could derail their ability to deliver those little bricks into our hands and keep themselves in business. As you'll hear, and listeners who work in risk functions will know, there's a lot of potential for human risk in how organisations seek to manage risk. Those biases and blind spots we see in other aspects of our decision-making can also apply on an organisational level. And much of what Hans has been doing in his work is developing an approach to risk management that takes into account the realities of how human beings make decisions. He had so many fascinating stories and ideas to share and was so generous with his time that we were able to record more than one episode's worth. So this discussion is split into two parts. In this part one, Hans talks about how he came to set up the strategic risk function and some of the key aspects of his approach. What you're about to hear are some fascinating insights. So please enjoy the first part of my conversation with Hans Læssøe on strategic risk. Hans, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I've heard a lot of them and thought it could be fun participating with my view.
It is great to have you here. And look, I would love it if we could start by talking a little bit about your background and career, because you have worked for one of my favourite companies ever. I was a massive fan as a kid and I'm still a fan now. So can you tell us your journey?
Well, yes, I can. What happened was that I graduated as a Master of Science specializing in nuclear power safety back in 1981. Now, nuclear power safety was not a good thing to be working with at that point in time, or the fact that we didn't have a nuclear power plant and we were not intending to get one. So I needed to find something to do. And through a fellow student, I got the notion of writing Lego and telling them who I was, and if they wanted to talk to me, I would be happy to talk to them. And that materialized because in 1981, there was a huge shortage of engineers. So I was called in and got to talk to the head of IT, and we talked about systems and a way approaching that and stuff like that. And the whole thing ended up taking 5-6 hours, including a dinner. And he ended up saying that, well, all the things you've talked about, I'd like you to come and help us with. And that was all that was said about any employment or anything else. But the fact of the matter is that 5 weeks later, I started at the Lego Group, fresh out of college. So I started there, started in IT. IT can lead to a lot if you leave it in time. I did. So after a year and a half, I joined supply chain. I was in supply chain for more than a decade, doing capacity planning, benchmark analysis, analytics, manufacturing strategies and stuff like that. Then I came to product development. Then I came with a chop of chit chops through portfolio management, strategic planning, back to product development and finance. I was a business controller for a while for product development. Then I became a corporate controller, started looking into corporate benchmarking. This was in the early 2000s when the Lego Group was losing money and we needed to do something about it. And I was there as a corporate controller at a point in time when my boss came down, or my CFO came down and said, Hans, we need some strategic risk management, don't you think? Now, I've never heard of the term before. I had no clue what the dude was talking about, but out of the words, it sounded fair enough. So I said, yeah. well, we've gotten a report from a consultancy and it's very bad, and try to find a simple way of doing it. You can get a day a week. Sure. Okay. Now, can I get the report? Oh, no. It's very bad. It's very biased. I don't want you even to see it. Try something different. Okay. What you had in mind? Don't know. Try Google. There's so much stuff in there. So I literally, in 2006, Googled strategic risk management, which was not a big feat at that point in time, but I got some hints. And I started looking and I started reading and I talked to some people and talked to some other people and gradually got into it and started working on enterprise risk management and see what is strategic risk compared to all the other kinds of risks that are around. And found that we were actually doing a lot. We have an insurance guy, we had somebody doing currency risks, we had somebody doing credit risks, we had a whole bunch of people doing health and safety on different occasions. So a lot of risk management was covered. What are strategic risks? Well, it has to be the risks that can affect our strategy and force us to change the strategy or the way we implement it. Okay, that's it. Now what do I do? And then I got some help from some other people, amongst others, the head of insurance, who was quite good. And I got gradually started getting a risk register, getting up and see, okay, what are these? And getting some assessments on what they were. And here I got a pretty good hint. Don't ask the risk owners what their assessments could be, because you go to a head of marketing about a sales risk. He's never contemplated the word risk before. And now you say, how big is the risk? What's the likelihood? He'll be totally at a loss. So what I did is I coached two friends I had in the company, also staff executives. And the three of us came up with a draft session of what they all were. What was the likelihood and what was the impact and why did we believe that? We did that for, I think, about 150 risks we had in this register that we have collected by asking a lot of people from around the company. And with that, we went to the head of marketing and said, you own this risk. We have assessed that there's this much of a chance we'll lose that much here and there. What do you think? Oh, this is way off, or this is too little, or this is too much, or I'm pretty safe for that. And that way, we got the whole ball rolling. But it didn't take me long to get bored. So I started looking at, okay, it's nice to know what the risks we have already taken are. What about the ones that we're about to take? So I wanted to move into decision-making, affect decision-making. And already at that point, the ISO standard was pretty adamant about that risk management must affect decision-making. They just don't tell you how to do that, but nevertheless, they still don't. But nevertheless, I started looking into decision-making, say, okay, where do we make decisions and how is that done? And I looked into our sales and operations planning. I looked into some of our investment planning and some of our IT project planning and stuff. How are risks considered in that? And some of the places they'd worse, and other places it was not. And say, okay, I have a point in here. I can do something about that. So I addressed some of the people and looked at the decision processes and started analyzing based on facts. What is the uncertainties that we have? Are they taken properly into account? And we adjusted the different things into how do we calculate with this. In the meantime, I had gotten a training program that introduced me to Monte Carlo simulation. That was a game changer. Monte Carlo simulation is a rather simple tool that you can put on top of Excel. There are plenty of them at this point in time, even some that are free. And then you can start modeling. Instead of saying 2 plus 2 is 4, well, the first 2 is somewhere between 1 and 5, probably 2, but could be 5. The second 2 could be minus 2, 1, or 3. And suddenly the sum of those two is not necessarily 4 every time. And you can put those distributions in. I had so much fun. I mean, I was Monte Carlo simulating my private budget and my walk and my trip to work and everything else. It was so much fun. But I got to know and understand the tool. So I started using that on some of the risks that we had and say, okay, now we work with ranges rather than single digit or single figure estimates on the different things. And that helped me a lot also on projects and decisions. And on some decisions, I could demonstrate that based on facts, you're way off. you're looking at a plus minus 15% uncertainty, and I can prove to you it's plus minus 30%. And you have to take account for that unless you will miss the ball. So we started working with that. I got involved in a couple of projects. I helped them change their decision making. I helped them change the project planning. We had one that was given a firm deadline, so you have to finish by that. And looking at the project plan, there was a 0.4% chance that they will actually make it. 99.6% chance they will not be able to make the deadline. We needed to do something about that. So we started working with that. Eventually, we got a lot of mitigation, and we went back to the steering committee, and we got a new deadline that was considered to be more realistic, and we delivered on that deadline. So these are the things that we built into it. It also means that a lot of things have been developed with trial and error and continuous improvement and trial and error and continuous improvement and listening a lot to the organization around it. I don't know much about marketing. I just have understood that it's important. So I listen to the marketing guys and ask them for what they think and what they believe, and then I use that. And I play one out against the other. So if one say it's somewhere between 10 and 100, and the other say it's somewhere between 50 and 200, and I go back to the first and say, couldn't it be 150? And I go back to the second one and say, couldn't it be 10? Nah. And then they come back with the rationales. And that way I try to balance out the human biases that everybody has. And it's not a problem that individuals have human biases. It's a problem when organizations act on human biases of individuals. So we need to set up some kind of governance system that takes human biases into account and not eliminate them, you can't, but minimize the negative effects they have so that you get valid decisions on it. And based on that, I started working more deliberately on decision risk management and impacting decisions using scenarios and stuff like that. Then at a point in time, my boss and his boss wanted to go direction A, and I wanted to go direction B. And as much as they believed in A, I didn't believe in it, and they didn't believe in B, and I did. So we decided to disagree and parted ways, and I started on my own in the company I call Actus. Just like Lego is a combination of the Danish words for play well. Actus is the combination of Danish words of active uncertainties. Uncertainties, risks, levers, opportunities, whatever you call it, they're facts of life. So you might as well learn how to leverage them and use them actively rather than being afraid of them, trying to avoid them, trying to minimize them and so forth, because that's not going to help. So might as well, now that it's there, why don't we use it? Why don't we leverage it?
So in other words, we surf the wave rather than pretending we can stop it.
Yeah, exactly. And if I could do that, it'll be very nice and help people doing that. The funny thing is that if there is no way, if there are no uncertainties, the first thing an executive will do is introduce uncertainty. I mean, if the market is totally flat and nothing is happening, somebody will come up with a new product. I was reporting to a marketing executive at a point in time in my career, and he has this notion that there is no such thing as mature industries. They're only tired marketeers. That was pretty good. He came with that at a conference where a guy has been talking about the mature market that they had and all the troubles they had in this mature market. And the first thing he came up on stage and said, there is no such thing as mature markets. They're only tired marketeers. The whole room was totally silent. But he had a point. And it's the same thing here with risk-taking. You have to do it. There is no such thing as not taking risks. So do it well when you do it. A risk portfolio is not to be avoided, not to be minimized. It's to be leveraged. It's to be optimized. So that's what I've been doing now.
Wow. And I mean, I find that fascinating. I just want to sort of pick you back on a few things you've said. I mean, the first one is you've come from a discipline that implicitly understands risk, right? Which is the nuclear industry gets what happens when it goes wrong. So on the one hand, I would say, well, this is somebody coming from outside the risk sphere. On the other hand, you've studied something where the risk profile is understood. You get it wrong. We've seen what happens. And so
Yes.
I'm really struck that you sort of, on the one hand, it's a fresh approach to risk. On the other hand, you were taking the things that you'd studied and really just going, okay, we need to, I can use some of these scientific methods. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this, I guess, with some of the skills that you'd picked up in the early discipline. And the reason I highlight that is I think a lot of people see risk as something that's done by risk specialists. But actually, as we look at all the things you've talked about, all of us are making risk decisions on a daily, if not hourly basis. I mean, you appearing on this podcast is a form of, taking a risk. I'm glad you did, by the way. Thank you. But it's fascinating. It's all around us. And so I'm fascinated by this idea that risk isn't a discipline for sort of specialists and experts. We all intuitively understand it. And what you've done is taken an understanding in one sphere and gone in and just started to look very simply at what's going on in another one.
It's true that my nuclear power, the closest I've ever been to my nuclear power education is actually the risk management job I ended up doing. Because, yes, they are accustomed to look at what's the worst that can happen now. And they always look at what's the worst that can possibly be imagined now, which comes up in some rather horrendous accidents that probably couldn't happen in real life. And then they miss some others. But yes, the approach, the line of thinking came back to me and looking at that. The most important thing I had coming to being a risk manager were two things. Both came out of the fact that I had been with the company for 25 years at the time I was actually started. I had a very good business understanding. I've been in supply chain, I've been in IT, I've been in supporting functions, I've been executive staff, I've been in product development, I've been in finance. I knew the company. I could see the interconnectedness between different things, so I can go ask. The other thing I had that was even more important is I had a large network of peers. I knew a heck of a lot of people across the company. So I would know whom to go to if I had this problem or that problem. I would know that this guy from HR and that guy from corporate affairs, if I put them together, we can start talking about the real risk of Brexit. Stuff like that. So I leveraged that and say, this is what I can do. This is how I can work with this and come up with something that is useful for decision making.
And I'm fascinated by the environment as well. So this is, I'd ignore the Legoland theme park, which I know is something that was disposed of. But if you look at the core business, I mean, it does one thing, and it's a privately owned family business. So the idea of bringing in risk management didn't come from a regulator imposing something, because there isn't a sort of regulator of toy bricks. I mean, there are regulations you have to comply with, but this isn't like banking where you would have a regulator saying, where's your risk management function? This is very much internal decision making.
Yes. To
have a look at this topic. And you're starting from a world that says we need to solve the problem, as opposed to we need to tick a box to please someone externally.
Yes.
And so I think it's in many respects fascinating that was decided upon, because you can see plenty of family owned businesses who might think they had this covered, who might naturally go, well, we know what we're doing. We've been doing it for decades. We're okay. Bad thinking, but you could see how they could get there.
Yeah.
And so I'm really fascinated by the fact that you were given that mission in a way with a blank sheet. Okay, there's a report there that you seemingly didn't see, but there was a sort of blank sheet, but go and solve this particular problem. And so that intrinsic motivation to look at this, I think is quite interesting, and presumably gave you latitude that might not have been there if the sort of the thing had been imposed externally.
Yes. Well, about the external imposure, the CFO at the time, who addressed me at the time, has actually had a former job as CFO of a bank. And was used to the kind of thinking and wondering why we didn't have anything. What I was looking at is what banks call operational risk management. They have so many others that have to do with money. But this is operational risk management, and we didn't have anything on that. That's one thing. The other thing is that by 2006, the Lego Group has just gotten out of the slump where they lost a lot of money and also almost lost its independence as a privately held company. So now we're about to grow. Now we're about to start. We got a new CEO in 2006 as well. We need to take some risks. But in order to do that, this banker came in and said, okay, if we're going to take risk, we got to better do it properly. And we need somebody to do it. Ask this guy over here, that is me, who have been in throughout the company and who have proven he could solve tasks we haven't really identified before, because I've been in that situation before. We have this issue, figure it out. It's not very tangible or anything else, but those are the kind of jobs or the kind of tasks I found was especially interesting and intriguing and gave a lot of energy and eventually solved somehow. So I got that reputation and I leveraged that. And again, I got it in risk management again to do it and say, this is what we need to do in order to take the chances that we can take and not the chances that we shouldn't take.
And I love the point you made around people thinking the unthinkable. And you beautifully described it as the marketing person isn't naturally going to think about the risks that they've never considered, right? Their job is to market things. And of course, that's a natural piece. Even if we are thinking in terms of risk management, we tend to think we have it covered.
Yes.
Because you'd look like an idiot if you sort of were to put your hand up and go, there's a big problem here, but I've never really thought about it. And so I love this idea of going through challenging what is a very natural position for people to take, which is I'm an expert in this field. And so I know what I'm doing and I've got this thing covered. And you've come in and beautifully posed those questions and said, well, let's think about the things you might not have thought about doing.
Yes. What we see, and the toy industry is extremely driven by new products. Half of revenue is new products every year. So there's a very short product life cycle and you launch a lot of new stuff. That means that every year you will have some successful launches and some failed launches. I mean, it cannot possibly be avoided. Please, in any company, anywhere, go find a marketeer who plan on failing. They don't. Of course they don't. I have a sales budget of 100. I'm going to meet a minimum 100, probably 150, maybe even 200. They never, ever considered the thought that they may only hit 40. But now and then it happens. And one hits 40 and the other one hits 200 on average, you're pretty well off. But it happens, and they have to discuss that, and we can discuss it in open-minded because, hey, we're looking at products that haven't been launched yet. I'm not blaming you, but the market has changed or whatever. And I came across some pretty horrendous stories where we had something that completely failed and something completely took off, both of which were problems in either end of the scale. But we needed to address these. And once we started addressing these and addressing this uncertainty with supply chain and how can they cover for it and how can they make up for it and make sure that they are able to handle whatever uncertainty is really there compared to what they think is there or what they like would be there. It's such a development. It's such a change in the way that you do things. And I don't tell them how to do their business. I can't. I mean, they know what their business is. I just ask them the not so stupid questions.
And how would you go about reporting this? Because I think one of the challenges that risk compliance, any audit to that is there to sort of keep a check on things, has a challenge of reporting back things that people don't necessarily want to hear. Either the people that are doing the thing that's being reported on, or potentially a chief exec or someone senior that's decided on strategy. And so you're literally the bringer of bad news. And if you're starting, it's bad enough in an organization where the role's established. That must have been fascinating being the first person in many respects to highlight these issues.
Yeah, well, I took it the different way around. Once I got to begin with, I started reporting the heat maps that everybody else starts reporting when they don't know what they're doing. And the heat maps are fantastic. I mean, you can use them for anything. As a risk manager, they're the best tools you can possibly have, but you can justify putting any risk anywhere you want it. So if you want them to discuss it, you put it in red, and if you want not to discuss it, you just put it in green. You can argue for anything, so it's a total freebie. And if it's based on the quantitative analysis, when you're using that, you can do whatever you like, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help management make decisions. So at a point in time, you get to do something different. And I started reporting on the likelihood that you will meet your targets. And looking at the facts and say, you have this project plan, say, here are 10 different other projects or 15 other projects along the same line. They had this performance compared to what they targeted, this and this and this and that. Based on that, and if your project is not very different, very good for IT projects, by the way, because they're not very different amongst each others. You have, with this plan, a 42% chance of meeting deadline and a 35% chance of being with budget and a 60% chance to be within scope. Are you happy with that? No. Okay, what are you going to do about it? The most important, the most effective things you can address is this one, and that one. Leveraging the tornado diagram that comes out of a Monte Carlo simulation. And then we start discussing what can we do about it and working, not with the executives. Executives are not executing. They're having people to do that. So what I did was I teamed in with the project managers and the business specialists and the junior marketers and stuff like that, those that are on the same organization level I was as a director and senior director, that didn't have a political agenda, just wanted to get the job done. And if I can tell them this is not going to work, and I can show you here and here and here, some of them will not listen. And well, there are always people who are, should we say, fact resistant, but some of them would, and you can help those and work with them and make them succeed. And when they succeed and the other guys fail because they're fact resistant, you get promoted the people who are good, and you gradually get this built into the way things are done. And the way we did project risk management for projects is pretty much company standard. I believe it's still company standard. I haven't been there for 4 years, but I believe they still hold on to that methodology of doing that systematic approach of making sure that projects actually meet their deadlines and their targets.
And I want to dissect that a little bit more, because you've had some fabulous discussions, I'll put it politely, with people on LinkedIn around this topic. And I love every time I see you going in for one of these. I love it because it just chimes with it. So this obsession with dashboards and RAG statuses, I think, drives meetings a particular way. And as you say, it's let's talk about all the things that are red, and anything that's green we don't talk about. And amber is either treated as, if there's too much red, we'll pretend amber is green. And if there's not enough, we can treat amber as if it's tending towards red. And so that drives the whole discussion. And of course, on projects, you literally get Groundhog Day repeats, where the last meeting repeats the next one, because typically things tend to stick in the red or the green. And so you end up discussing known problems rather than unknown problems. And I'm fascinated by this idea. On the one hand, it makes sense from a simplification perspective, right? I want to see everything on one page and give it to me in some colors that I recognize from traffic lights. But there are plenty of psychological flaws, but also from a presentational perspective is madness, because you've got things like a project has just started. How can you have any clue whatsoever whether it's likely to succeed? Day one of a project, everything's green. Well, why is that? I would argue it's gray because we don't know yet. And there's plenty of examples like that where the simplicity appeals to people, but the practicalities of the discussions it drives and the behaviors of the people that are being required to report into that are pretty toxic. And it fascinates me every time I see you going into this, that this isn't more widely understood, because there seems to be a lot of people holding on to that because that's the way it's always been done and it feels safe. But actually, when you start to dissect, you don't have to analyze too far to realize these things are incredibly dangerous.
I mean, first of all, you can use what another guy working in UK, Ben Fluber, a Danish professor at Oxford University, talks about, called reference class forecasting. When you make a forecast of a sale or a cost or timing, don't guess. I mean, people are bad at guessing. Don't guess. Look at something similar. How much did that take? How much does this take? Well, I had 3 IT projects before. They're much smaller than this one, and they took 6 months each. Now, this one is bigger. Maybe we should count for doing it more than 6 months, even though I done a wonderful waterfall that I can say I can do it in 5 months and 3 weeks. Let's assume that it may take longer, because if the smaller projects take 6, this probably would take more. And there's a bigger project that took 12 months. We're somewhere in between then. Let's look at 9 and see what happens. Take some of these. The scoping took that much time. The programming took that much time. Testing took that much time, so forth. And then you can start simulate on that with the uncertainties that are in there from your known projects. Monte Carlo simulate the whole stuff. Monte Carlo simulation is a pivot tool, an absolutely required tool for a risk manager or a risk specialist. Nobody else needs to know. They just have to read the results. But it's your tool. It's just like the finance knows how to use a general ledger. So you need to know that, and you can start working with that. So you can, from the beginning of a project, say, okay, there's this likelihood that we will meet the deadline. There's this likelihood that we will deliver on scope, and there's that likelihood that we will deliver on finance. Is it perfect? No. Is it good enough to make decisions? Probably, at that point in time. And then you go ahead and start running the project. And as you get along, this risk is passed, and we passed that one, and this one never materialized, and that one never materialized. Great. Now the span of what we will actually deliver and when we will deliver it and for what money gets closer and closer. And we are more and more certain where it is. It could be we're certain in the far end because one of the big risks we really worried about hit us at 120 miles an hour. We have to take that into consideration. That's it. I mean, von Clausewitz said, no strategy survives the first encounter with the enemy. This is true for business as well. Once you hit real life, something happens and you need to adjust for it. But the more prepared you are, the less impactful it'll be. It's all about being, I mean, a lot of risk managers are scared. And I started out saying, don't be scared, be prepared. Take the COVID-19, don't be scared, be prepared. Know what you do. Know how your supply chain can be affected by a pandemic. I mean, COVID is not the first pandemic. It's not the second pandemic. It's not the third pandemic we've had in new time. So we know how pandemics can impact global trade. Now we have the Suez Canal on top of it. We know how stuff like that can get holded up for some other odd reason. Know what your alternatives are. Know what it is. How much time, how much backup or lockup in the Suez Canal can we have before it begins to hamper our deliverability? What are we going to do about it? The first day it starts. You say, okay, now we have this. If this lasts more than 4 weeks, we're going to be in trouble with this product and that product. Okay, let's buy some either close at hand or let's start flying them in, so that we won't do that because we don't know this is going to be done in a week or two. Somebody will try hard, yes, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So you can start being prepared, have your plans, think it through. I mean, thinking doesn't take a lot of time. You can do a lot of thinking in an afternoon when you look at a specific focus. So that's what I want to train people to do on an enterprise level, and more importantly, on a decision level. The enterprise level is only valid for strategy and for budgeting.
It fascinates me because when you talk in those terms, we all intuitively know that if, for example, I have a regular drive in a car to go somewhere, maybe drive to the airport. Let's pick an example that's not relevant at the moment, but everybody understands, right? If you drive to the airport, I kind of know that one time I almost missed my plane because I hadn't planned. That tells me something. And maybe if I'm smart, then the next time I'll go, maybe I'll leave a bit of extra time because you never know. And so, I'm cooking a recipe and I realize I don't have an ingredient, or it's taking longer than I expected, or I forgot to turn the oven on. So there's lots of things, and we compensate for that in our personal lives. And we do think, some people are stupid and don't learn from the lessons, but the vast majority of us, at least on some level, learn from that. We go, I won't do that again. And yet what seems to happen when we translate into a corporate environment is we sort of seem to park some of those basic human instincts about learning from the past. And we become, very different people. And yet the dynamics that you described about, the difference between me making it to the airport on time or getting some Lego bricks to be transported on a boat through the Suez Canal, different scenarios, but same problem, right? Which is I need to get something done. I allot a certain amount and I plan around that. And yet it amazes me that we don't think in those terms in organizations.
True, it does too for me. And then we come back to this governance structure I was talking about earlier. Because yes, you learn that once you get late or almost miss a plane or even perhaps miss a plane, you start earlier next time. And you start maybe an hour earlier. And then that hour becomes tedious. It's 50 minutes, 45, 40, 35. And 2 years down the line, you start 5 minutes earlier than you otherwise would have done. And you have the same problem once again because the learning doesn't stick. The most ridiculous part of it is once you've had an earthquake in California, everybody buys insurance for earthquakes. Hey guys, now the tectonic plates have moved. They're not going to move again for decades. Now the decision is ridiculous. The buying of the insurance policy is ridiculous. When it's gone 50 years, now the likelihood increases that the tectonic plates will scratch up and start moving again, and you'll have another earthquake. Now you should start paying, but it's 50 years. Nothing has happened for 50 years, so why should we bother? Well, you should bother from time to time. And the idea is that in an organization, small organization is one thing, and in a large organization like the Lego Group or even larger companies, you have the capacity, you have the resources enough to think it through and think through a plan. I mean, you can take the Brexit. I was discussing that with a Lego. a few Lego people when David Cameron set up for the election. I think it was the month after or something like that. Once he called them, he said, "We're going to make a general election on this one." And I met up with a couple of guys and say, "Hey, if those guys actually leave the EU, how will it affect our business?" And we decided over lunch that we couldn't decide. So we found that we needed more resources. And we called in a meeting of people from sales and HR and organization and supply chain and IT and a whole lot of other things, and put them together in a room and say, this is the scenario. The UK is leaving EU. How is that going to affect our business? And a lot of instances, we found that it's not going to do a heck of a lot. I mean, consumers will still want the products. Somebody will still want to sell them. It may not be the same stores. There could be some trouble at the borders. There could be some warehouse issues. There could be some short-term delivery issues. There could be some this and that. But these issues and those issues are important. And then we sat down and say, okay, how do we address those issues with the people relevant to that and knowing about that? And then we made up a special report to the executive team and say, hey, guys, Cameron has called up for this election. It's not due yet, but we don't know about the likelihood, but should the Britons actually choose to leave the EU, these are the consequences that we are facing, and this is some of the things that we can be doing. And the important things is that we need to do this and that if it actually happens, but we will have 2 years. And we know from when they leave, when they decide to leave, and when they will actually leave, there will be a 2-year implementation period in the paragraph 50 of the EU regulations. So we will have the 2 years, but we need to start immediately in order to make it in time. And for now, don't worry about it. We have it covered. And they thank us and say, okay, that was great. That was great to know. Now we don't have to worry about it. And they didn't worry about it. And then when the Brits actually decided to leave the EU, we hit the button and say, okay, now we prepare here, 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 and here. And then it took forever and a day in order to get even Article 50 invoked. And then it took forever and a day to get agreements ready. And we still have, there probably still some issues here and there and around. They're prepared. And I'm dead sure the Lego Group, without knowing, because I'm not there anymore, I'm dead sure they haven't lost sales on that.
Well, I can tell you from a customer perspective, because I just bought some, that the product is very much still arriving. And there is, at least in this household, personal demand for it. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of it. But I recognize that is possibly just, my perspective on things. There may be broader issues. But I think that's a fascinating example of something that you sort of, it'd be very easy to close your eyes to and say, okay, we're a Danish company. It's not going to affect us. It's not going to happen anyway. And because of all the permutations, this is going to be really hard. So we'll just put our head in the sand.
Yes. And the funny thing is that, or not the funny thing, but the reason it comes into an enterprise risk management platform and goes that way in is that there's no way you're going to budget with that stuff. There's no way you're going to do your strategic planning based on that stuff. Because nobody was going to start in 2015 or 2014 making a strategic plan just in case the UK left. They wouldn't do that. But once they did, they have to change their strategy. They have to change some of the things that they did. Okay, but let us know what it is. Think it through. And make sure that you have the plan. Somebody knows what they're going to do, so they're prepared instead of being scared.
And I love the way you're talking there, because that is one of the arguments against this thing. So if I look at, why did companies have problems under COVID? It was things like lack of preparedness, just-in-time supply chains, a whole host of things that made economic sense, but didn't necessarily make logistical or resilience sense, if that's a word.
True.
And so one of the counter arguments to what to the sort of we need to prepare for everything is this is really expensive. And how can you expect us to spend money on what looks like a wasteful activity until you actually need it? And so that financial impediment, I've got to allocate a ton of money to solve this problem. I'd rather not do that because that's going to hit my bottom line now. Very short-term thinking is obviously one of the reasons people struggle with this.
Which I think is awkward, because they pay insurance premiums left, right, and center. Whether or not they actually need the insurance, that's another funny part of it. A lot of companies buy insurances they really don't need because they can easily afford the losses. but they still pay because the insurance managers say we can buy this insurance, and okay, let's buy that insurance. So it's, yes, you allocate money to it, but it's only a matter of saying, what's the likelihood that this will happen? There's a 10% likelihood this will happen. It's costing us £100,000 to mitigate. So that's it. But if we don't mitigate it and the risk materializes, costs us 10 million. Now, 10% likelihood, that's 1 million. So we have made our money 10 times over. You have to introduce that kind of risk-adjusted thinking in your budgeting. But it's true about everybody's looking, when things are doing well, they're looking at getting leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner. And it'll be like doing your private budget based on the fact that the stores are closed. I mean, I'll buy exactly what I need, exactly when I need it. And there is no way I will ever buy a shirt or a candlelight or anything I don't need if it's not in my budget. No family's budget works like that. Nobody's working like that. There's also always something that comes up and say, this is a good offer, we'll buy it. And then you end up spending more money than you should have done. And you do the same thing in companies. You need to be aware of that. My good fortune at the Lego Group was that I was given the right to focus on that. I mean, my colleagues at that point in time had insurance responsibilities or other kinds of health and safety risk management responsibilities on a daily basis. One was the head of travel department of all kinds. So they had a day job, and then they did strategic risk management in between. I was only focusing on that. I was given all the freedom to play. And the next leverage I had was when I started doing Monte Carlo simulation, and I was working with that. I had a meeting with our executive team and talk about where I wanted to talk about what I was doing with this and what the methodology was and how it worked and stuff like that. And I went through the methodology for like 10 minutes or something like that. And then the CEO say, and I vouch for the approach. It's spot on. And everybody else shut up. I mean, there's no more comments. Everybody bought into it because the CEO had said he vouched for it. It wasn't until I left the room, it dawned upon me, oh yeah, right, now I know why they did that. One, he's a CEO. Two, he has a PhD in mathematical game theory. This is kid stuff for him. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. So if he sanctions that one, they all know this guy has a PhD in the stuff. If he says it's right, it's right. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So they bought into that. So I got a lot of leverage from the top, time-wise, process-wise, and stuff like that, which helped me a lot, of course, to focus.
So that's it for the first part of my discussion with Hans. Part 2 will be released very shortly. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To find out more about Hans and his work at Actus, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. I'll be back very soon with part 2 of my discussion with Hans, but in the meantime, stay safe, enjoy your Lego, and thanks for listening.